All right, chapter 12, leases, landlords, and tenants. In this chapter, we're going to explain characteristics of the four types of leasehold estates. We're going to describe standard lease provisions, including various forms of eviction. We're going to learn what eviction is and the effects of the Truth in Renting Act and the Americans with Disabilities Act. We're going to discuss differences between various types of leases and identify the functions of a property manager. So, what is a lease? A lease is an intangible or incorporeal asset that is personal property. The owner is referred to as the lessor because we're talking about a lease. So the owner is the lessor, they're the ones that give the lease. They intentionally transfer most of their rights, like the right of possession, to the tenant, the lessee, for a limited period of time as defined in the lease. The lease also sets forth the length of the contract, the amount to be paid for the right to use the property, and defines the rights and obligations of the parties. Every lease has a demising clause in it that states they're to transfer the property by lease. So every lease has a demising clause describing what the landlord is renting and that the tenant is taking possession. A lease is both a contract and a conveyance in that regard. So let's highlight the lease and demise, and the statute of frauds requires that leases for a period of more than 3 years be in writing, and a lease may be recorded if it's for 2 or more. All right. Let me know when you got the notes.
Got it.
So statute of frauds, we didn't see, this is not the first time we're seeing this slide. We just need to know what's in the circle there, in the box. Statute of frauds says that even though general contract laws of the state state that verbal contracts are legal, just like those that are in writing. However, for real estate, all contracts for sale are required to be in writing. A lease contract is not, unless it's 3 years or more. Then it's required to be in writing. Or if a real estate agent is involved. Any contracts we prepare must be in writing. And if a lease is 2 years or more, we could record it. All right, so an estate and land. What is an estate and land? We learned about this in chapter 6. It describes the amount and kind of interest that someone has in real property. And there's 2 categories of estates and land. The category that describes ownership is the freehold estate. And there's 3 types of freehold estates. Do you guys recall what the three types of freehold estates are?
Fee simple,
Yes.
fee D. What was it?
Be determinable or defined
Determinable.
quickly.
Yeah.
And a life estate.
Life estate. Yeah.
So, can you guys hear those leaf blowers going on outside or no? Okay. I opened a window over here. I invited more noise in. I don't know if you guys are hearing it on your microphone, if it's picking up. Okay. There are four types of leasehold estates we're learning in this chapter. They're less than freehold. You're not allowed to hold it forever or a lifetime, and so it is not ownership. It's A leasehold is when an owner intentionally transfers some of their rights and interest in the real estate they own to the tenant for a limited period of time as defined in the lease. So a lease is considered personal property that's an intangible or incorporeal asset. The four types of leasehold estates are estate for years, periodic estate, also known as period to period, an estate or tenancy at will, and an estate or tenancy at sufferance. Rent is due at specific intervals per the lease. If it's not stated in the lease when the rent is due, it's actually due at the end of the month. In the arrears, they call that. Where's your rear? Your rear end, the end of the month, okay? The opposite of an advance at the beginning of the month, where most landlords want the payment by the first, right? If they do not specifically specify when the rent is due in the lease, it's actually due at the end of the month, the last day. A holdover tenant is one who did not vacate the premises after their lease term rights have expired. A landlord can accept a holdover tenant, or they can choose to evict them. So what is eviction? Eviction is the legal process of removing a tenant through the court system. A landlord cannot lock out a tenant or turn off their services or physically remove them or their belongings. The tenant does have rights. And eviction is the process of revoking those rights because the tenant violated the terms they agreed to in the lease, which granted those rights, or the lease expired, granting those rights. So now let's highlight four leasehold estates and the four types. And the four leasehold estates are an estate for years, all right, so we have an estate for years. What is an estate for years? It's a lease for a definite period of time. It's for a fixed term. It has an end date in it. Do not be fooled by its name. An estate for years need not be for a period of years. It's for a fixed term. It has a start date. It has an end date. You know when it's going to end. Whereas a periodic estate, from period to period, it also has a date in it, but that date is not an end date. It's a renewal date. This type of leasehold estate, the lease will automatically renew for the same amount of time that the original lease was written for. An estate or tenancy at will is for an indefinite and undefined period of time. It's at will. An estate or tenancy at sufferance is without the landlord's consent. we'll get into why shortly. So an estate for years. Oh, wait, same one. We didn't change it yet. There we go. So let's highlight here on page 228 the distinguishing characteristics of a leasehold estate. So I wrote there of a leasehold estate. It doesn't say that in the book, so I just highlighted it and then I wrote of a leasehold estate. So it reads distinguishing characteristics of a leasehold estate. So for an estate for years, it's for a definite period of time, and I wrote right after that for a fixed term with an end date. An estate from period to period automatically renews, and I wrote after that has a renewal date in it. And an estate at will, I wrote there, it's for an indefinite period of time. It's undefined. We don't know how long any party can terminate this type of estate with 3 months notice. So it's for an undefined period of time until someone wants to terminate the agreement. And an estate at sufferance is without the landlord's consent. Okay, so I underlined the word indefinite for estate at will because I want you to associate the word indefinite with an estate at will. It's an undefined period of time, an indefinite period of time. So, estate for years, don't let the name fool you. For a fixed term with an end date in it. But it doesn't have to be for a period of years. It could be for a week, 3 months, a year, 2 years. It's for a specific defined period of time with an end date. No notice to quit is required in order to terminate at the end of the lease, because you know when the lease ends. Unless you've been given a new lease, it's been terminated. You got to get out by the end date. So if the tenant doesn't renew by signing a new lease, they must vacate at the end of the term. No further notice is needed. So let's highlight those things on page 228. Everybody got that? All right, so a periodic estate from period to period has a renewal date in it rather than an expiration date. This lease will automatically renew for the same length of time as the original lease, unless either party may give notice to quit or terminate before it renews. How much notice is required to be given before it renews? Depends on the length of the lease. Week to week, 1 week's notice. Month to month, 1 month's notice. If it's for a period of years, 3 months' notice is required. Now, if a tenant gives their notice to quit, but then they don't vacate, they can be held liable for double the rent for each month that they remain, that they hold over. So let's highlight periodic estate. And I want you to cross out the word indefinite in there. Even though it makes sense in this sentence, I do not want you associating the word indefinite with a periodic estate because that will mess you up on exams. This sentence works perfectly fine without the word indefinite there, where it says periodic estates, sometimes called an estate from period to period, are created when a landlord and a tenant enter into an agreement that continues for a length of time without a specific expiration date. Rent, however, is payable at definite intervals. So this agreement's automatically renewed for similar succeeding periods until one of the parties give notice to terminate. When a tenant occupies a property after the stated ending date, it creates what's called a holdover tenancy. The tenant held over. They did not move out. Now, that could be perfectly fine as long as they're still paying rent and the landlord's fine with them not signing a new lease. But that's up to the landlord to accept or reject them. You guys got it?
Yes.
All right. An estate or tenancy at will. This is the one with an indefinite period. No length of time has been expressed for the lease term. Either party, the landlord or the tenant, must give 3 months' notice to quit, to terminate the lease. It's terminated automatically on the death of either the landlord or the tenant, and both parties must agree to the indefinite term agreement with 3 months' notice to quit. This is often used by a landlord who's been notified that the state's going to take their property by eminent domain. Now, they don't know how long that's going to take or when exactly that's going to happen. And in the meantime, they may have mortgage payments they need to make. They got to pay their property taxes. So they're kind of stuck. You got to get a tenant there that you could lease to, but you can't sign a 1-year lease with them because when a property gets taken by eminent domain, it's up the legal requirement for the landlord is to make sure it's delivered vacant to the state. So landlord can't enter into a long-term lease with a tenant. So we enter into a tenancy at will. So you know that when the state finally gives you a solid date, they're going to give you at least 3 months notice. So you have 3 months, you could give the tenant 3 months notice to quit. You got 3 months and you got to go because the state's going to come in and they're going to take over the property now. And an estate or tenancy at sufferance is when a tenant who once had a valid lease, the lease had expired. The tenant didn't sign a new lease. They didn't renew the lease and they didn't move out. They're now considered a holdover tenant. And most importantly, they're not paying rent. So a holdover tenant not paying the rent can be evicted at any time. When, for the reason of non-payment of rent, when doing eviction, no notice is needed to be provided to the tenant. They know they got to pay the rent. You could start eviction on a tenant for non-payment of rent at any time. This is not squatter's rights, which could create an easement by prescription. This is a tenant who once had a lawful, valid lease that expired. Now, just as fee simple absolute is the highest estate in land, tenancy at sufferance is the lowest. The tenants have rights. The tenant rights have expired. They didn't move out. They're not paying rent. The landlord cannot remove the tenant themselves. They can't go out there and pull them out by their hair and throw them out on the street or change the locks or turn off the heat or hot water or anything like that. The tenants still have rights even though they're not paying rent. Go figure. So those rights must be revoked by the courts to get them out. Remember, I keep telling you that when you have rights, nobody can take your rights from you. Well, with a tenant, when you're renting, how did you get those rights? They weren't endowed to you by God. They were given to you by the landlord in a contract called a lease. And if you violated the terms of the contract or that contract had expired, well, now you can have them revoked from you because you violated the agreement. But the landlord can't revoke them, only a court can. So eviction is the process where a landlord revokes a tenant's rights to occupy their premises through the court system. To put it in plain English, that's in a nutshell what's happening here. So the tenant's rights expired. They didn't move out. They're not paying rent. For every month they remain, they're causing the landlord to suffer. Thus, the tenancy at sufferance. Yeah, that's where we get that term from, tenancy at sufferance. You know, you're causing the landlord to suffer every month you're there. They can't get you out. They can't get another tenant in there who's going to pay rent. The landlord can't make their mortgage payments or their taxes because you're living there rent free now in their property, probably destroying it too. You're causing the landlord to suffer while you're there. All right. So make sure you highlight this, but when you highlight it, also write that they're not paying rent, because the book forgot to enter that very important little detail. You're not paying rent. To be a tenant at sufferance. The book just says a tenant at sufferance arises when a tenant who lawfully came into possession of real property continues after their lease rights have expired. No, that's just called a holdover tenant. But if you held over possession of the premises without the landlord's consent, you're just a holdover tenant. But if you're not paying rent on top of that, now it's a tenancy at sufferance. That's an important part of the definition there that they left out conveniently. So to recap, demise is a transfer of property by lease, and every lease has a demising clause in it that says the landlord is to let the premises and the tenant is to take control of it. The leasehold estate is a tenant's rights to occupy someone else's land, and they're considered personal property, which is an intangible asset. A holdover tenant is a tenant whose rights to occupy real estate have expired, but they did not vacate at the end of the lease term, whether they're paying rent or not. They're called a holdover tenant. Now, there are 4 types of leasehold estates. We got the estate for years, which is for a specific period of time, has a start date and an end date. No notice to quit is needed at the end of the lease term to get the tenant out. Periodic estate is an estate that automatically renews for the similar succeeding periods of time. It automatically renews for the same amount of time the original lease was written for. No notice, the amount of notice to quit is dependent on the length of the lease term. Week's notice required for week-to-week rental. 1 month's notice is required for month-to-month. 3 months' notice is required for a period of years. Now, the tenancy at will is for an indefinite period of time. There's no termination date in this lease. Either party can give notice to quit and has to give a 3-month notice. And lastly, once again, the tenant at sufferance who lawfully came into possession with a valid lease. The lease expired. They're not paying rent. They didn't get out. Every day that they remain, they cause the landlord to suffer, is a tenancy at sufferance. All right, so some of the standard provisions of a lease, just like standard provisions of a purchase contract. Competent parties, demising clause, a description of the premises, what exactly is being rented. Because if I rent you my house, I could exclude the basement or the attic or the garage. You need to specify what exactly is being rented and what is not. The term must be clearly stated, the duration of it, if it expires, if it renews, if it's at will. How and when the rent must be paid has to be specified. If you don't specify, New Jersey law states that rent is due when? In the arrears at the end of the term. The lease must be in writing if for a term of more than 3 years, and it can be recorded if it's 2 or more. And of course, like all contracts, they must be signed by all parties. Okay, nothing in the book about window guards, but window guards is definitely on your exam. So we're going to go to section 36 on page 235 and put a highlighted box around section 36 of the actual lease in the book. So they must have deleted a paragraph about window guards many versions ago, because this is something that's definitely on exams. All right, so put a highlighted box around that section 36 of the lease, and then the next slide, we'll go over what it is. I got a nice explanation here for you. You may want to snap a picture of this, especially since there is no explanation in the book other than that paragraph in the lease. So, what is a window guard? Well, it prevents the window from opening wide enough for a child to fall out. It prevents the window from opening wider than and having any gaps wider than 4 inches, basically. So it prevents the window from opening wide enough for a child to fall out. It applies to buildings with 2 or less rental units. Window guards must be installed by the landlord. If a child 10 years of age or younger is going to be living there or regularly present there. If the tenant gives the landlord a written request to install window guards. Homeowners associations are responsible for installing window guards in hallways and common areas. And it's only required on first floor units if the window sill's at least 6 feet above grade, above the ground. That's what that means. We wouldn't want that child to fall out the window and get hurt. So, buildings with 3 units. Now, this is all you need to know for exams is what's in the box. But I have additional information about other ones just for your own professional knowledge, your edification. So, buildings with 3 or more units, the landlord must install window guards. They have to install window guards unless the tenant indicates in writing that they do not want them. And every year before that, February 15th, must have the tenant fill out a form about window guards. Installed window guards must be inspected twice a year between March 1st and May 1st, and again between September 1st and December 1st. And they need to keep a log recording of the results of the inspection. If you have window installed air conditioning units, window AC units must be installed using tamper-resistant one-way screws to bolt the AC unit securely into the window frame without leaving any open space greater than 4.5 inches. And residents can be charged up to $20 for each window guard that is installed. So what do window guards look like? They look like this. This is what they look like from the exterior of the building. This is what they look like from the interior. Here is a diagram of installing window guards, and there can't be any space in those bars that is greater than 4.5 inches. And you have to have that stoppers. They got those L stoppers to prevent the windows from opening beyond the height of the window guard. And if you have those swing out windows, in this picture right here in the middle, they show you that you got to measure 4.5 inches, that it cannot open more than 4.5 inches. They got one of those L brackets over here. So the lease, let's look over the anatomy of the lease again here. The use of the premises, the term of the lease, agency relationships have to be disclosed in the lease. There has to be a CIS acknowledgement that it's been given to the tenant. Opinion 26 must be the cover page. Yeah, most people don't have attorneys review leases, but they have to be notified. We need to give the opinion 26 notice anytime we prepare a contract and a lease and an attorney is not involved. So the opinion 26 notice must be the cover page of purchase contracts and leases that state that they have a right to hire an attorney and have one review the contract. Residential leases for property built prior to 1978. You got to give that pamphlet about protecting your family from lead in the home. You got to give them that lead paint disclosure that was filled out first by the owner. And that 10-day opportunity to conduct an inspection or waive it. According to New Jersey's new lead safe law, inspections are required from the state of New Jersey, not for the federal law, but for the state of New Jersey, for any property built prior to 1978. So anytime you have a tenant turnover, you got to have it inspected. The only time that you don't have to have an inspection, according to New Jersey's lead safe law, is it for buildings built after 1978, those certified free of lead paint, single and two-family seasonal rentals, units located in buildings with 3 or more units that have been registered as lead-free and have no outstanding lead violations in the last 5 years, and had a lead safe certificate issued within the last 2 years. Security deposits. Let's learn a little bit about them. Tenants usually have to pay security deposits, right? Now, the security deposit is a guarantee of rent payment for damages. Money must be placed in a special interest-bearing account used only for security deposits. You know, most people, they get a year-long lease, right? So your money could have been sitting in your own bank account earning interest, albeit not much, right? So the landlord has an obligation to put your money in an interest-bearing bank account used only for keeping security deposits of tenants. The tenant must be notified where the money is being held. The tenant must get their interest earned, paid, or credited to them on the anniversary date of their lease annually. The penalty for the landlord could be that they are required to pay double the entire security deposit to the tenant if they don't put their security deposit in an interest-bearing escrow account and notify them where that is. The maximum security amount that the landlord can charge a tenant by law for residential properties is 1.5 times the monthly rental figure. Commercial real estate has no maximums for security deposits. If the landlord wanted to charge you 3 or 6 months security deposit and they could get away with it, it's legal. But for residential, the maximum is 1.5 times the monthly rent. Pet security can be charged as long as the total security deposit collected does not exceed 1.5 times the monthly rental figure. Service animals cannot be charged additional fees, rent, or security because they're not pets. So it's not advised to even call it pet security. Just security. So it must be returned within security deposits must be returned within 30 days of lease termination. So if there's no damages, the landlord needs to return the entire security deposit within 30 days. The penalty for violating that rule is double the entire security deposit that the landlord is holding for the tenant. If they do make deductions for damages caused by the tenant, it must be stated on an itemized report how much each repair costs and deduct it from the security deposit. If the property is sold, the landlord must turn over security deposits to the new owner and notify the tenant where it's being held. Let's highlight these things about security deposits. Let me know when you got that. All right, so late payments can be charged to tenants, but you got to check local rent control laws if your municipality has them. They could restrict if and how much you could charge, if, how, and when you could charge for late payments. Now, some tenants must be given a 5-day grace period free from any late fees or penalties. People relying on Social Security benefits, old age railroad retirement pension plans, any government or quasi-government pension or payment, they have to be given a grace period of 5 days, because if the government is late sending them their monthly payment or weekly or whatever the payment is, if the government is late sending their payment, then you cannot hold the tenant liable for paying late because they didn't get their pay yet. So government's allowed a grace period of 5 days. So always check local rent control laws before charging any late fees or penalties that could restrict you from doing so or limit how much you can charge. So let's highlight that. Landlords may charge a late penalty for late payment of rent, except to these people. Okay. All right. Tenants cannot take possession until the date specified on the lease. Don't you ever give access or keys to a tenant to a rental unit before the inception date on the lease, even just to put a few things in the unit, because that's considered that they took possession of the unit then. And then if something happens, the landlord would have to evict them to get them out. Don't ever give people the access to the unit or to put their stuff in, or give them keys to the unit even before the inception date of the lease, before the inspections are done, before they pay the rent. Don't do it. We remember this one. Legal principles of a lease. We saw this video once before. This is that one where that landlord's agent. We saw this in chapter 4, so I'm not going to show the video again. This is that one where that landlord's agent used his pass key to get into the tenant's apartment to do some perverted things with one of the tenant's fiance's underwear. So the tenant, the landlord, or their agents cannot use pass keys to get into apartments whenever they want. They need to have the tenant's permission. Because when the landlord rents to a tenant, they passed along all of their rights to that unit. You can't just get access to it because you're the owner of the building. When you lease to somebody, you're passing along all of your rights to the tenant for the term of the duration of that lease. The only time you're allowed into that apartment is if the tenant gives you permission, or if you had, previous arrangements to come in to maybe treat the apartment for pest control or something like that. But you had prior notice given. The only time you could use a pass key to come in without prior permission is in cases of emergency. Anything else would be considered defiant trespass. It's breaking in and entry, pretty much. Improvements require written permission from the landlord, even just to paint the apartment. Tenants can't even paint the apartment without the landlord's permission. The landlord got to make sure that you're not going to do something stupid like paint it bright pink or paint the rooms black. Do something like that. And if you do, and they give you permission to do that, they're going to want to make sure that you paint it back to a neutral color, like an eggshell color or something of that nature. And that's why landlords, you cannot do any improvements to the unit without the landlord's permission, even painting. I've seen tenants paint some wacky colors of rooms, and the landlord got to give you permission, but on a condition that they approve the color. And if it's anything other than neutral, it's the tenant's responsibility to repaint the apartment before they leave, because future tenants may not like those colors that the tenant is going to paint it. So if the landlord gives the tenant permission to paint it and any other color than a neutral color, they're going to want you to paint it back. Otherwise, they'll take the money out of your security deposit to do it. Now, trade fixture is a fixture used for business purposes. It's considered to be personal property. The tenant can remove it before the lease expires. If they don't, it is possible for that trade fixture to become a fixture and part of the real estate. So if they don't remove that trade fixture before the lease expires, that trade fixture becomes a fixture and the property of the landlord. Some examples of trade fixtures could be barber chairs that may be bolted to the floor, gas station pumps, sinks in a beauty salon, shelving in a supermarket, the range and hoods in restaurants. These things must be removed by the tenant before the lease expires. Otherwise, they become the property of the landlord. So let's highlight. Let's write this next to, where is this? Page 240. Page 240, where it says improvements. Right above it, trade fixtures. They're tangible personal property. Tangible personal property is called chattel. So let's write that there as well. Chattel or chattels. And it is customary to provide that such trade fixtures may be removed by the tenant before the lease expires. Now, that's not for residential property, though. That's for businesses, trade fixtures. Okay. When you're renting real estate, you need to get the landlord's permission to do any improvements. And generally, any improvements you do become part of the real estate. You can't, landlord's not going to give you permission to do improvements on their property and then just tear it out when you leave. You know, like if they give you permission to change the light fixture to put in a ceiling fan light fixture, they're not going to want you to rip it out when you leave. And when you do that improvement, they're going to want a licensed electrician to do it. They don't want you burning down their house or electrocuting yourself. Okay, leases carry an implied warranty of habitability, saying that the premises are fit for human habitation. A tenant must return the property to the same condition as they received it. The landlord is responsible for repairs unless specified otherwise in the lease. Tenants are always responsible for any damages they do. And the DCA, that's the Department of Community Affairs, they inspect buildings with 3 or more units, not counting the unit that the owner lives in, at least once every 5 years. The industry lingo for this is, we call it the green card inspection, because when you passed the certificate that they gave you that for passing the inspection, um, it used to be green in color, so we called it a green card. So that name stuck, and we still call it a green card, even though now they just send it to you a PDF document, and you print it yourself and uh, post it there. Um, if the rent is withheld by a tenant to force the landlord to make necessary repairs because you have an uninhabitable condition or dangerous condition, that money should be placed in the escrow account to pay the landlord later after they've done the repairs. You got to pay them back all that back rent. You don't just continue paying them, start paying them rent again from the time that they've done the repair. A lot of people misinterpret this law to be that you could stop paying the landlord rent until they make the repairs. And then once they make the repairs, you could continue paying them rent from that day forward. No, you got to pay them back all the back rent that you've been withholding from the landlord until they made those repairs. See, tenants misinterpret this law and often get evicted because they don't keep that money and they don't pay the landlord that back rent. And the landlord goes forward with eviction. And they're like, well, I withheld the rent because the landlord didn't fix this. It was a dangerous or uninhabitable condition. And that all may be true and well and all. And then the landlord did the repairs and the tenant started paying rent again, but the tenant misinterpreted it. You got to pay all that back rent too. If you don't got the money, out you go. So let's highlight those things here and make our little notes. Page 240. Everybody got it? Or still taking the notes? Take your time, but just let me know. The New Jersey also does recognize the tenant's right to repair and deduct, where the tenant may withhold rent until repairs have been made, or if repairs are vital, and the landlord doesn't make them within a reasonable amount of time, have the repairs done and then deduct them from the cost of the rent. Tenants screw up this one a lot too. They end up going and getting their friend that knows how to do the job. They get them to give them an inflated bill and say, okay, well, I'm deducting that from the rent. Landlords are going to end up evicting you. They're going to take you to court because you didn't pay the rent, because you deducted too much. Sometimes this is not new. Nobody's being slick about this. We know tenants, they got friends that write up inflated bills. So landlords know what the average cost of certain repairs are. And courts will put the burden on the tenant that if they choose to do the repairs, they have to shop around for a deal for the landlord, not to cost them the most money possible. So they got to get at least 3 quotes. Just a little heads up there. All right. Now, state inspection, once again, often referred to as the green card inspection. That's the industry lingo's name for it. It's required for buildings that we sell that have 3 or more units, not counting the unit the landlord lives in. If the landlord lives in one of the units, there's only 2 units available for rent, right? So then the local municipality would do the inspection. State does the inspection if there's 3 or more rental units. The DCA, Department of Community Affairs, performs the inspection on behalf of the state. The state inspection must be performed at least once every 5 years. And hotels and motels must be inspected at least once every 3 years. However, those inspections can be spot inspections without prior notice. They could just drop in on the motels and hotels to do them. When heat is included in the rent, between October 1 and May 1, it must be at least heated to at least 68 degrees between 6 a.m. and 11 p.m. and at least 65 degrees at night. Now, you may say that, whoa, that's freezing. That's cold. Well, it ain't freezing. Yeah, freezing's 32 degrees. So, hey, if you're not paying the rent, what are you complaining about? But see, that's sometimes an issue. But hey, even when people pay the rent, sometimes the landlords try to cheap out with the heat, the cost of oil and all that stuff if they got a big boiler, you know. So there's certain conditions that they have to maintain. You can't turn off the water, heat, or gas or any services if it's included in the rent. Now, this used to be on exams back when I took my real estate licensing exam. I haven't heard any students come back to me and tell me that they saw a question about this temperature thing on their exams, though. I mean, if you see it, say something, but otherwise, I haven't heard about this being on exams anymore, but it used to be. Between October 1, May 1, must be heated to at least 68 degrees between 6 a.m. and 11 p.m. and at least 65 degrees at night. Now, typical leases restrict a tenant from subletting. You can't assign your lease to someone else, and it specifically says that in the leases. Our leases definitely do. So assignment is when that tenant transfers their lease obligations to someone else. However, the original person named in the contract is never relieved of their original contractual obligations. They would have to novate the parties. They'd have to do novation of the parties or novation of the contract in order to relieve themselves of that original obligation. So subleasing transfers the lease if the landlord permits it. But the original tenant's still responsible if the new tenant doesn't abide by the lease terms. An example is not making rent payments. Any destruction of the premises, well, the tenant's responsible for those damages. Now, here's the guide about how much notice to quit is needed to be supplied to the tenant in certain circumstances, depending on the type of lease that you got, the type of leasehold estate that you have. So once again, an estate for years, no notice is needed because there's an expiration date in the lease. When the lease expires, if you didn't sign a new one, you got to go. If it's a tenancy at will, 3 months notice is needed. And a periodic estate, it depends on the term of the lease. Week to week, 1 week's notice, month to month, 1 month's notice, and an estate, and for a term of years, it requires 3 months notice. The Truth in Renting booklet. By the way, you need to know how much time how much notice a tenant needs to be given before you could start eviction on them. Well, this is it. You know, estate for years, no notice. Tenancy at will, 3 months notice. Periodic estate has varying periods. You need to know those terms. So you guys did put a highlighted box around that, right, on page 241. Now, Truth in Renting booklet is the booklet that informs tenants of their rights and obligations and the landlord's rights and obligations and provides resources for the parties. The state no longer prints this book, but they still publish it in PDF format, and the tenants and landlords can print it out. And you can get that from the DCA's website. Let me see if these links work still. Okay, yeah. So this link now takes you to the DCA's website where you can have this interactive booklet here. Okay. Let's see, landlord flood insurance, related form publications, and here you go. Covers all kinds of issues. Or if you like, you can download the old-fashioned booklet guide in English or Spanish right down here. All right. So the DCA is required to provide that booklet to the tenant. I'm sorry, the DCA requires that landlords provide this booklet to the tenants, but they're only required to provide it to tenants when they have 3 or more rental units. However, all tenants can get access to these booklets, and all tenants have the same rights, whether it's less than 3 units or more than 3 units. But your landlord's only required to give it to the tenants in buildings that have 3 or more rental units available. So beginning March 20th, 2024, every landlord must provide a notice to prospective renters, including whether the rental property is located in a FEMA special flood hazard area or moderate flood hazard area, and actual knowledge that the rental premises or any portion of the rental premises, such as tenant parking spaces, have been subjected to flooding in the past. Landlords may print a copy of the Truth in Renting booklet and the flood risk notice from the DCA website. Okay, so I got a link here to that notice. This is the notice here. It's just this notice been provided on the rental property, got the address of it, and municipality, county, lot and block number. Is any or all the property located wholly or partially in a flood area, a 100-year floodplain zone? Is any or all the rental property located wholly or partially in a moderate risk area, a 500-year flood zone? Has the rental premises or any portion of the parking areas ever been flooded? Yes or no? How many times? And this information needs to be provided to the tenant. As of March 20th, 2024. The Truth in Renting booklet, here's where we'll highlight it in the book. On page 242. 242. So after the second paragraph on page 242, I just highlighted Truth in Renting, and I wrote the word required above it. Well, I wrote required to be given to tenants in buildings with 3 units or more, not counting the unit the landlord lives in.
Got it.
Disclosure of owners and managers to tenants and the municipality for emergency purposes. Names and addresses of the owners and resident managers who may be living on site must be on file with the local governments and state agencies when they register the property for rental use. Federal crime insurance. Tenants must be notified if federal subsidized crime insurance is available through the Department of Housing and Urban Development, HUD, in high risk areas. I guess that's high crime areas. You know, renter's insurance ain't that expensive. For less than $100 a year, you could insure like up to $60,000 worth of your belongings. So I'm not sure. I mean, how poor do you got to be to need to get subsidized, crime insurance through HUD, and how much would it cost? I mean, it's not even $100 a year. So, but either way, landlords need to do that. I couldn't even tell you where you get it, but you could get it through HUD somehow. And the Americans with Disabilities Act, the ADA. We went over this in chapter 4. Okay. But we're going to go over it in a little more detail here. The ADA was created to prevent discrimination in the workplace against people with disabilities. So what kind of properties is it dealing with? Commercial. Title III of the ADA prohibits discrimination in commercial buildings, requiring them to be handicap accessible. States that all new construction must be handicap accessible. For existing structures, the ADA recommends reasonably achievable accommodations to provide full and equal access to the facilities and services. Reasonably achievable accommodations means at little cost without massive retrofitting or remodeling. So it may be useful to consult with ADA experts and architectural designers. So it's cheaper and easier to make a new construction handicap accessible than it is to modify an existing structure. So that's why when it comes to existing structures, they have to modify them to make them handicap accessible. In some situations, it can be very expensive and costly to do so. I didn't. I was going to buy a building, and I didn't buy the building because the hallways were kind of narrow. Couldn't fit a wheelchair down them. But yet the city inspectors in Edison, they were like, well, you need to make the bathrooms handicap accessible, so that you could fit a wheelchair and you could have it big enough the wheelchair can turn around and all this stuff. I'm like, I looked down the hallway and I was like, how are you going to get a wheelchair into the bathroom? I got to modify the bathroom and make it handicap accessible, but but the hallway, you're not going to be able to get a wheelchair to the bathroom. How are you going to make? Well, it doesn't make sense. They're like, well, that's what you got to do, and they were ridiculous in Edison. Like the doorway to come into the building had a lip on it that was like an inch and a half to get into the building. Like at the bottom of the door threshold. And they're like, oh, you got to put a ramp in. A ramp? Ramp for what? What are you talking about? And they're like, well, you're only allowed to have a 3/4 of an inch step up here to get into the doorway. Otherwise, you need to have a ramp. I was like, okay, well, I got a wooden block and make a ramp and put it there so that they could wheel right in. They're like, nope. You need to have that full length handicap thing that's made of metal that has the grab bars on the side and everything. I was like, oh, I thought these modifications were supposed to be cheap and expensive just to make it handicap accessible. What the hell? Those things cost about $5,000 at least. You're wanting me to remodel a bathroom that the wheelchair can't even get to. Like, I'd be better off tearing down this building and putting up a new one. This is ridiculous. So I was like, sorry, I'm out, and I didn't buy the building. It was this was just like scratching the surface of the crap that they wanted me to do to this building. I guess they didn't want anybody to buy it for some reason. Who the hell knows? But sometimes cities do that. You get the inspectors; they give you a hard time. They make it so that nobody wants to buy the property. They'll really bust chops on that. Um, if like the city's lawyer is looking for office space and they really wanted that building, sometimes they could do stuff like this and be really ball busters. I've seen them do it in Linden with a bus depot, a bus station. I've seen them do it in Piscataway with the former Italian Americans building, the Italian American Club. They had a brand new building, and then that building went up for sale because they didn't need it anymore on a big property. But the city lawyer wanted it, So we found plenty of people that wanted to buy it, including people that wanted to turn it into a church, and they kept busting everybody's chops, making it impossible for anybody to wanna or be able to buy it. So anyway, those are just examples of corruption, though. So, examples of reasonably achievable accommodations Could be like lowering wall-mounted payphones, if you could find them still. Lowering water fountains or installing a cup dispenser instead as a workaround. Changing the direction in which doors open, adding ramping, changing doorknobs to push bars, or installing auditory signals and braille buttons in elevators. Making handicapped parking spaces available for people with disabilities where appropriate. So let's highlight here, Americans with Disabilities Act, the ADA. Title III of the ADA prohibits discrimination in commercial properties and underlying commercial properties. And then to protect the owners of existing structures from massive expensive remodeling, the ADA recommends reasonably achievable accommodations to provide access to the facilities and the services. I guess reasonable, you could put some big air quotes around that. So that last part is on page 243. This part's on page 242. All right, everybody got it? Service animals. We spoke about this extensively in chapter 4 as well. But remember, service animals means any dog that is individually trained to do work or perform a task for the benefit of an individual with a disability, including physical, sensory, psychiatric, intellectual, or other mental disability. Tasks performed can include, among other things, pulling a wheelchair, retrieving dropped items, alerting a person to a sound, reminding a person to take medication, or pressing an elevator button. When a person with a service animal enters a public facility or place of public accommodation, the person cannot be asked about the nature or extent of the disability. Only 2 questions may be asked. Is the animal required because of a disability? And what would the task, a work or task that the animal is trained to perform? That's it. Under Titles 2 and 3 of the ADA, service animals are limited to dogs. However, entities must make reasonable modifications and policies to allow individuals with disabilities to use a miniature horse if they've been individually trained to work or perform tasks for individuals with disabilities and they've been housebroken. And of course, the structure can bear their weight. I know they're miniature horses, but they're probably going to be weighing more than you, right? And the ADA requires animals to be under the control of their handler. This can occur using a harness, leash, or other tether. An entity may also assess the type of size and weight of a miniature horse in determining whether or not the horse will be allowed into a facility. Yeah, here's just that guide of the ADA, the reasonable accommodations that they have there in the book. They put a picture guide there. Adding grab bars, installing an intercom so that a second floor business without an elevator can provide access, providing doors with automatic opening mechanisms, providing braille menus, lowering publicly mounted telephones, allowing guide dogs, providing ramps in addition to the stairs, or provide personal shoppers to help out. All right, so rental referral agencies, we learned about this at the end of chapter 1. rental referral agencies must check if units are still available with the owners of the building. Rental referral agencies deal with landlords of apartment buildings, apartment complexes. They usually have their own rental office, but a real estate agent can have a relationship with the building owner and come into an agreement that if they introduce a renter to their building and they rent a unit, that they'll get paid a referral fee to their agency. Now, if we get a listing, well, if you advertise that property, you need to check every day to see if a unit's still available. So you need to call up the owner of the building because they could have rented it out on their own already. If it's an in-house only listing that's not advertised, we need to check if a unit is available every 3 days. Any advance fees more than $25 we need to place in an escrow account from a tenant or prospective tenant. So let's highlight, if prospective tenants are charged advance fees of more than $25, regulations require depositing those funds into an escrow account. And units that are advertised must be checked every day to see if they're still available. And units that are simply listed must be checked every 3 days. Okay. Okay, when it comes to rent control, once again, these are laws that are set up not by the state, but by each municipality. These laws are set by each municipality, and not all municipalities have rent control. These laws put in place prevent abusive landlords from taking advantage of tenants. Controls raising rent, charging late fees, evictions, etc. Licensees should be careful when showing rental properties for sale to investors. They should use caution before telling them the rents are below market rates and can be raised. If the municipality has rent control, they may not be able to be raised. And that's probably why the landlord's trying to sell the property, because these properties cannot no longer be profitable. See, rent control is one of those two double-edged swords as well. I guess you could look at it that way. It's meant to protect tenants from abusive landlords. However, landlords who are not abusive can still be negatively impacted by these rules because they could prevent and dictate how much a landlord can raise the rent by, if at all. And they don't stay in line with cost of living or maintenance of the apartments. So if the apartment needs, or if the building needs maintenance, the older these buildings get, they're going to need more maintenance to keep up with them. And if the landlord's unable to raise rents in line with the going rental rates, it may be tough to maintain those buildings. And you got to remember, the landlord's not just in this as a charitable thing, just to provide a place for you to live. It's a source of income. It's a living for them. That's how they make their money. That's how they feed their families, right? So if a landlord cannot raise the rents in order to stay in line to be able to keep up with the maintenance of the building and to be able to live off of, they're going to want to dump the property. So if they list the property for sale with you, you get a listing for a property. It's got a rental, and your town and that town has rent control. The don't be surprised if they're listing it at a lower price just to dump it. But if you are helping a buyer, an investor, perhaps to buy this, or owner occupant, want to be a first time landlord, that wants to rent this unit, and they could see how, oh yeah, it's a nice building. Yeah, it seems all right. Needs some work, but it's a nice building. It's cheap enough, so it seems like it's a good buy. Be careful. Be careful. If you look at those rents and you see how cheap they are, be careful with your puffing. Don't tell them, you can always raise the rents here. Can they? Can they? If they can't, well, don't say that. Not unless you're sure that they could raise the rents there. Because even though they seem like they're below market rate rents, that may be there for a reason. Be careful, because if they buy that building, then they find out that they can't raise the rents to maintain that building and make a living off that building, and you're the one that told them that they could raise the rents, now you open yourself up to lawsuits. So anyway, these rules are set by the municipalities if they have them. And although rent control clearly benefits tenants, many argue that in the long run it can hurt them, because it could discourage investors from putting up rental housing and can cause a hardship on landlords who can't bring rents up to fair market values, encouraging them to let the buildings deteriorate and eventually be abandoned. So, condo conversions. Not the first time we've seen this one either, right? What's a condo conversion? You take a rental property and you convert it into deeded units that you could sell, turn them into condos. But in order to do a condo conversion, certain tenants cannot be evicted during this time. Those age 62 and older, or certain disabled persons who lived there for at least 2 years before the conversion began, and their incomes no more than 3 times the county's per capita, or in any case, no more than $50,000 a year. If they meet all 3 of those criteria, they could remain as tenants for the next 40 years. So we'll highlight that on page 245.
Got it. Got it.
Okay. Now, constructive eviction is different than regular eviction. Constructive kind of sounds like construction, right? Well, it is. It's when there's a problem with the construction of the building, where there's a condition that a dangerous or healthy or health related condition that would make it dangerous for the tenant. So actions taken, in constructive eviction, the action is taken by the tenant to legally terminate the lease early if the landlord fails to provide basic services and make essential repairs when there's an uninhabitable condition. The tenant must notify the landlord that there is a problem first. Landlords can't read your mind. And if they don't fix it, vacate, move out, and then stop paying rent. I said that landlords can't read your mind. It really stuns me. I don't know if it's ignorance, stupidity, or what it is, but I can't tell you how many times I've seen tenants get so angry at their landlords because there was a problem that they've been living with for a while, but they never told the landlord they had a problem. They just like expected the landlord to fix it. And they dealt with it for a while. And as it built up in them and their anger builds up, they just blow up on the landlord. The landlord's like, what the hell? you know. Um, So you got to notify the landlord that there's a problem before you could expect them to fix it. And then you got to give them reasonable time to fix it. I mean, how long would it take you to get a contractor to come in and arrange them to come in and fix the problem? You have to extend that same courtesy to the landlord. So the tenant would notify the landlord that they're terminating the lease early due to constructive eviction. Remember, seek legal advice and help before taking any action here, though. Landlords must return all security deposits when a tenant terminates the lease early due to constructive eviction. So in this example here, this is an example of this that I actually came across with one of my tenants and landlords. I had a landlord that had this, it was a one-family house that was zoned and being used as a two-family because it was grandfathered that way, and this was in Edison. So it basically was a one-family house, and the basement was actually a second apartment that was legal because they had this entryway. They had these steps that went outside, and there was an entryway that was built out with a door there and everything. But that was the only entrance and exit. So the stairwell that went into the house, from the basement, that door was actually locked at the top level because you had different tenants that were living there. You don't want tenants to be able to access the other units, but technically it was supposed to be unlocked in order for it to be a legal two-family, but you don't want the other tenants in the other unit to be able to just open a door and be in your unit, right? But either way, that door was always locked. So right off the bat, this is weird that it was even grandfathered to be allowed to be a two-family rental. So you had one guy and his family that were renting the house, and then this one girl I got as a tenant. She was a single mom, newborn baby. She rented the basement. Okay, so the landlord just slapped a coat of paint on everything, made it look nice and seemed clean and everything. So she liked it and she rented it. A couple months later, she calls me and she's like, "Victor, what do I do? I got a problem." I was like, "Well, what's the problem?" She's like, the landlord's really responsive, but he only responds to text messages and emails. Like when you call him, he don't answer, but text message and emails, he's really responsive, but he's been ignoring me. I was like, "Well, what's the problem?" She's like, "Well, I first noticed this when I was bathing my baby in the tub. You know how parents, when you have a newborn, you don't put the baby in a tub. You put them in that little plastic tub that goes inside the tub or sink, right?" So she was bathing her baby inside that little plastic tub inside the tub. And she's like, "I first noticed it when I was bathing my baby in the tub. Every time the tenants upstairs flush the toilet, it comes out in my tub." I would say that classifies as an uninhabitable condition. What about you? Could you imagine bathing your newborn baby and then like urine and feces are coming out of the tub into the tub? That's disgusting. Or just imagine yourself standing in the shower, taking a shower, and that starts backing up like that. So basically what happened was I got this little diagram here. You got your sewer pipes, they come out down to the basement level through the tub. This is the tub. And then it goes out to the street to the main sewer. But before that sewer pipe reached to the street on the owner's property, the pipes collapsed. Tree roots or whatever it was, doesn't matter. So the landlord's responsible for replacing those pipes that collapsed on his property. So he just didn't want to bear the expense of a $2,000 repair or whatever it costs. So he was putting it off and ignoring her. And you know, that's not a condition anybody should be subjected to. That's disgusting, right? So I said, well, you know, what you could do is in Edison, it is the health department that manages the inspections for rentals. So go down to the city and file a complaint with the health department. And then, do you have a friend or family member that you could temporarily move in with for a little while I look for another unit for you to rent somewhere else? She's like, yeah, I got a girlfriend. And I was like, okay. Then what I suggested you do is then uh, move in with your friend. So move out and then stop paying rent. And then notify the landlord you're terminating the lease early due to constructive eviction. Oh, I also told her, can you document or do you have proof that you've been in communication with the landlord and telling them that there was a problem? Because you had to tell them there was a problem first and be able to document that. And she said, yeah, I got text messages and emails. I was like, okay. And so I said, but before you do anything, this is legal advice, and I don't want to get you in trouble and jam you up by telling you to do the wrong thing. So before you do anything, though, other than the health department, you could go to them now. But before you take any other action, um, I gave her an attorney's number. I was like, give this guy a call, ask him if I'm telling you to do things in the right order and the right way, because I don't want to jam you up. So she did that. He said I told her to do the right thing, so she went ahead with it. She went to the health department, and the two girls down there at the health department, she was talking about it to them, what was happening, how the sewer was backing up into the tub and everything, and they were just like both like, "Oh, ew, that's disgusting." "Oh yeah, yeah, we'll check it out." Um, and then the one girl was like, "Okay, what's the address? We'll look it up." He looked at the address, and then the one girl at the health department was like, "Guess who it is?" And the other girl was like, "No." They're like, "Yep." And it's like they knew the guy. It's like he owns a bunch of rental properties, and apparently this is a thing that he does. He refuses to do repairs or make necessary improvements until the health department gets a complaint and forces him to do it. So like they know him by first name. They're like, "Yep, it's Chester," and they're like, like they knew him by his first name. Yeah, they knew who it was, and the worst part of it all is the guy's an attorney. So he should know better, you know. So I told her, I was like, listen, file the complaint, move in with your girlfriend, get all your stuff out, and only after you're totally moved out, then and only then stop paying rent. And then notify the landlord you're terminating your lease early due to constructive eviction because of all of the complaints that you've been making and how he's been ignoring you, and you want your security deposit back. He can't withhold any of the security deposit. He has to return it all. And guess who I got a phone call from yelling and screaming at me after this? Take a wild guess. Old Chester. He gave me a call. He started yelling and screaming at me. Keep in mind, he did not know I was talking to her and telling her what to do here. So what was he yelling and screaming to me about? He's just cheap. He was like, I hired you to get me a tenant. I paid you a commission to get me a tenant that was going to be living here for the term of the lease, which is at least a year. And I think it's something on my teeth. And the tenant, she moved out early, and so I want my commission back, or I need you to get me another tenant, and I'm not going to pay you a commission on it. I said, well, I know what's going on here. I said, it's pretty messed up what you did to that girl. And I earned my commission when I found you a tenant. We got the city inspections done. You gave her the keys. She signed the lease. You gave her the keys. She gave you the money. We got the city inspections done. The date of the lease started. I earned my commission. It's now a landlord-tenant issue. Because you can't keep your tenants because you want to be a slumlord. Because that's what you're doing, right? You're failing to do repairs like this. That makes you a slumlord. You know, that was a scumbag move that you did to her. And I told him that. I said that just like that to his face. I said that was a, well, actually, I did it on the phone. You know, I said that's a scumbag move that you did to her by ignoring her, knowing that this problem was there and refusing to fix it. Would you want to live in an apartment where the tub was backing up the sewer? So he's like, well, I want my commission back. Otherwise, I'm going to sue you. And I was like, well, first of all, I already told you, I earned my commission. Like he's trying to throw around his weight that he's going to sue me because he's a lawyer. Like I was going to be scared or intimidated. I was like, screw you, buddy. I was like, I earned my commission when I produced a ready, willing, and able tenant, and now it's a landlord-tenant issue because you can't keep your tenants because you're going to be a slumlord. That's your issue. I said, if you're going to be treating good tenants that I get you like this girl was a good tenant. She paid her rent on time. She was quiet. She's there with her newborn baby, you know. And then you're going to treat her awful like this. I was like, I don't want to deal with you. I don't need to have listings from somebody who's gonna mistreat their tenants. I was like, I'd rather not have that business. Um, Again, he's just threatening to sue me and yelling at me on the phone. I was like, I basically told him to go F himself and, you know, where he could stick it where the sun don't shine. I was like, I don't need your listings, okay? Don't don't be afraid. You're not going to get in trouble for turning down a landlord and not taking his rental listing, especially if you know that they act like this, you know. So I basically told him to stick it where the sun don't shine. Of course, he never sued me because he didn't have a leg to stand on, and I knew that. So I stuck up for myself and that tenant, really, and I ended up getting her another place. All right, so that's what constructive eviction is. It's when there's an uninhabitable condition and the landlord fails to make necessary repairs. The tenant can terminate the lease early and get all their security deposits back. Now, this could also be looked at in another way. It could be looked at, well, landlords intentionally are not doing the repairs because they want the tenants out so that they get another tenant in who's going to pay a higher rent. Now, that's not what happened here. But in that situation, that would be the landlord breaking the law. Okay. They can't try to remove tenants to force them to want to have them do the termination of the lease because you failed to do the repairs, but you're doing that intentionally because you want them out. That's another situation, a little bit harder to prove, but that's another situation that does occur. That would be an illegal actions on the landlord behalf if they did that. Now, suit for possession or actual eviction, that's the normal form of eviction. Actual eviction is an action taken by the landlord. Eviction is the process of the court revoking the tenant's right if the tenant breaches the terms of the lease. Landlords file for what's known as a summary or dispossess proceeding to dispossess the tenant from the property, and the landlord must provide a notice to quit to the tenant before they could file for eviction. For any reason that the tenant violates the lease, the landlord is required to supply the tenant a notice to quit whatever lease breaking activity it is that they're doing before they could file for eviction. If they don't, then they just go to court, and then the landlord says was proper notice served, and it was not, and it can't be proven that it was not or was. The judge will kick it out of court. However, only one reason the landlord is not required to supply a notice to quit to the tenant. What reason is that? Non-payment of rent. So the only exception that does not require a landlord to serve the proper notice to the tenant is for non-payment of rent. Then no notice is required. They could just file for the eviction. Now, how much notice is needed to provide the tenant before filing the eviction for that lease breaking activity other than the non-payment of rent? Well, it depends on what that lease breaking activity was. So On page 245 and 246, there's a landlord's guide for giving, well, this is what I named it, Landlord's Guide for Giving Tenant Notice to Quit Before Filing for Eviction. I know it's a long name, but that's very explanatory and specific of what it does. So here it is. Well, no, not yet. Here is the constructive eviction and suit for possession, actual eviction stuff. Let's highlight those notes now and make these notes. And then we'll get on to that guide. Everybody got the notes?
Got it.
So once again, non-payment of rent, no notice is required. Any other violation of the lease requires the landlord to serve proper notice to the tenant before they could file for eviction, like tenant's disorderly conduct or destruction due to the tenant's gross negligence. Tenant continues to violate the landlord's regulations that they may have added into the lease that the tenant signed. Well, here it is. Now, in this version of the book, it is not on one page. It is spread across 2 pages, but it's under the title Causes for Eviction. I wrote at the top over here, Landlord's Guide for Giving Tenant Notice to Quit. So don't throw away this book after you get your real estate license. Hold on to it. There may be some useful information in here that you could reference, like this, especially if you're going to be dealing with renters. So I just put a highlight box around the whole thing. I highlighted the first bullet point, which is what we need to know for exam, that non-payment of rent, no notice to quit need be filed. And at the top, I put Landlord's Guide for Giving Tenant Notice to Quit Before they could file for eviction. And that's on page 245 and 246 here. So there's different time frames the landlord needs to serve for different offenses. The landlord can supply the tenant a written notice to quit whatever lease breaking activity it is that they're doing. Then they have to wait a certain time frame, revisit it, and if the tenant is still breaking the lease in that way, then they could file for eviction. In some instances, they may need to serve the tenant with a second notice to quit before they can file for eviction. It depends what it is. You got to really read through all of these things here. By the way, often I'll tell you about TV shows or movies or documentaries that are related to topics. Here's one. Anybody ever see this show? The channel's not on TV anymore. I think they renamed the channel. It used to be called Spike TV. Anybody remember that? Spike TV? It was like the Guys channel. And in this they had a show there called the TV. Let me see. It was called The World's Worst Tenants. You guys can still find those episodes online. Here I got a link to it where you could read about it. They actually had a couple seasons, and they were going to renew it for another season, except one of the stars of the show got into a fight with one of the cameramen or the people on set, and there was a lawsuit that was going on because he broke his nose or arm or something like that. I don't know. But the network did renew the show, but it ended up never coming back. So uh, it was an excellent show. Basically, these people were what did they call themselves? Landlord tenant. I forget what they called themselves, but they were like the mediators between the landlords and the tenants. Anytime landlord needed something checked out at the property, instead of going to the property themselves, they hired this third party because they didn't want to deal with tenants directly. So they did like the enforcement activities for landlords, inspecting when there's complaints about tenants, or if the tenants are failing to pay the rent, or they're some other lease breaking activity. These people would go down, check out what's going on. They would investigate it. They'd ask questions. They'd talk to people, and then they would serve notices to quit and things of that nature. It was a really entertaining show because it showed you it was a compilation of the world's worst tenants and some of the things that they pulled. It was very entertaining. It was reenactments, of course, and it was three people. It was the main guy. He was like a this big muscle head former Marine. You had his wife, which was an ex-police a policewoman, and then you had his friend who was just his buddy. That was his other sidekick. And it was an interesting program. Here, I'll show you guys the link to it, and you guys can check it out. See if they look familiar to you at all, if you remember this at all. World's Worst Tenants. Okay. This was oh, look, you can watch all these episodes right here for free online. There, I'll show you I'll share with you the link of this. There you go. It is in the class links Word document as well, of course, like all other links that I share with you. But yeah, so they had 2 seasons. They were going to have a third season. Look, you can see it on Can you see it on Amazon? Yeah. Okay. So you can watch it on Amazon, Vudu, Microsoft Movies, Apple TV, or right here you can watch it for free. Okay. Held at gunpoint. You guys look at it on your own. I'm not going to go through this. There's a lot of, and we can really get lost in this because this is really kind of addictive watching. It's kind of like watching a train wreck happen. You can't look away. So let's just pass by that one. But there are some very entertaining episodes there. I shared that with you though. There's some excellent time wasters for you. All right. So you guys have these notes all highlighted in that little note put there, right? Nothing you need to study for exams here except for the non-payment of rent in the case of filing for eviction for non-payment of rent. No notice to quit required for that. Now we're going to go over types of leases on page 246. Types of leases. I'm on the wrong page. So types of leases. And then right next to that, payment and what's included. Payment and what's included. So payment and what's included. So here you have a gross lease. What is a gross lease? These are common in residential. These are more common in residential, but you could find them in commercial. The tenant pays the basic rent. The tenant's the lessee. They pay their basic rent, and the landlord is responsible for maintaining the property, paying the taxes, repairs, insurance, and the like. In a net leases are common in commercial property, in commercial and industrial properties, where the tenant pays the basic rent plus all or most property charges, except for mortgage financing. So the landlord may pay some property charges in a net lease. It depends on what was agreed to. Now, there's something called a triple net lease, or sometimes that's expressed as NNN. A triple net lease, the tenant pays all property charges except for the mortgage. So the tenant's responsible for paying the taxes on the property, the insurance, the landlord's expenses for insurance, their own renter's insurance. They have to pay for any repairs, etc. Yeah, that's common in commercial real estate and industrial. And then in a percentage lease, this is for retail, like in shopping centers and such. Sometimes you see this. A percentage lease, the tenant pays the basic rent plus a percentage of their gross sales. They may pay property costs as well, but they pay basic rent plus a percentage of the gross sales. And the landlord may pay some or all of the property charges. So let's get into it in a little more detail. Did you guys have all this down already? Yeah. So the gross lease is common in residential leases, but it can be used in commercial. The tenant pays a fixed rent, and the landlord is responsible for all the taxes, insurance, mortgage payments, repair, and the repairs connected with the property. Except for damages by the tenant. Now, a net lease, the tenant pays their rent and some of the property charges, whatever was agreed to in the lease. In a triple net lease, expressed as 3 N's, NNN, the tenant pays rent and all other property expenses like CAM charges, the common area maintenance charges to maintain the property, landscapers, snow removal, the repairs of the leaky roof or air conditioning units, etc. They pay for everything except for debt services. That would be the mortgage loan. This is often used in commercial and industrial properties. It's very common. So here's that definition of CAM, since I mentioned CAM here. Common area maintenance charge. Each tenant must pay their share of these fees proportionate to the percentage of the total space of the building or area they're renting. So for example, my school, I'm renting 5% of the total space of the building. Even though we're teaching remotely now, I'm still paying rent for a physical location because the Real Estate Commission requires it. So I have 2,000 square foot of space that I'm renting, and I'm responsible not just for the rents, I'm responsible for the landscaping, snow removal. I pay 5% of it because I'm renting 5% of the total area of the building, 5% of the taxes, 5% of the landscaper, 5% of all the expenses that the landlord would have on the property except for their mortgage debt services. And so in a gross lease, this is what we'll highlight in the book on page 246 under gross lease. Now, there is another sentence in this version of the book right after this sentence. The whoever did the rewrite in this book, I guess they liked making up ways to remember stuff. And some of their ways to remember stuff so far that we've been reading through this book are just outright wrong information. And I don't know who the heck they got to do this rewrite. But they need to retake a class themselves. And some of these ways to remember stuff are just they're just strange and hard to remember on their own. I don't know. I just crossed it out altogether, so I can't even read what it says anymore. But this is the stuff that you should have highlighted. Everybody has that, I guess, the way I can see you on camera. Okay, so now the a net lease, triple net, common for commercial and industrial properties. Write that next to there. The net lease provides that in addition to the rent, the tenant pays some or all of the property charges. And with a triple net lease, the tenant pays taxes, insurance, and all other property expenses except for the debt services. They pay the CAM charges. So I wrote in there CAM, common area maintenance charge. It's kind of like condo owners, right? Condominium owners, they pay their monthly maintenance charge to cover the CAM fees. Hmm. Hmm. I see. And with a percentage lease, it provides that the rent will be based on a percentage of the gross income received by the tenant doing business on the leased property. In this type of lease, most commonly found in shopping centers, shopping malls, where the tenant pays a small fixed rental amount with an additional agreement that the tenant has to pay a percentage of their gross income to the landlord. Now, that could be structured in different ways. It could be the tenant has to pay their rent plus a percentage of all of their gross income, or it could be a percentage of all of their gross income above a certain dollar amount. Or it could be a percentage of their total gross income above a certain dollar amount with a minimum that the tenant needs to earn. Okay, so you guys ever go to the mall and you see a store that seems like it's doing killer business? It's real busy. And then next time you go there, it's gone. It's shut down. You guys ever see that? You ever wonder why the store is gone? They were so busy. Well, it could be that the widgets that they were selling, that's the made up product that I'm making up. We'll call it a widget that what they sold. The widgets that they sold at the store, people ate them up. They loved them. They bought the hell out of them, but they weren't earning enough money from them to satisfy the appetite of the landlord. So the landlord terminated the lease. So, for example, if they had an agreement that they had to pay $1,200 fixed rent and then pay 5% of all gross sales in excess of $30,000, but the tenant didn't make the $30,000 a month, well, then they weren't making enough money to satisfy the landlord's appetite. So they would kick them out, terminate the lease. It's kind of like, did you guys ever see on TV the Alaskan Gold Rush or those shows where they start? You got those gold prospects. You know, they're digging the dirt, running them through the sluice boxes in Alaska and other places, and they're trying to find gold. You guys ever see those? It's another reality show on TV. You guys ever see that one? You got the modern day gold prospectors. They basically most of them are not digging on their own land. Most of them are renting the land, and they got the heavy machinery that comes in to dig the dirt, run it through the sluice boxes, try to sift through it, and get the gold. So those leases with those landlords is usually that those prospectors are paying a rent to dig on somebody's property and move dirt around. But they have a further agreement with the landlord that they have to split a percentage of the gold find that they get with the landlord, with a further agreement that they need to get at least X amount of gold out of the ground. If they don't, the landlord's going to terminate the lease and find another prospector who will rent the land from them that knows how to get the gold out of the ground. That's the way that works. Similar to this percentage lease. Now, how do you calculate the rent and the CAM charges in a triple net lease? Don't just take the rent and the CAM and add them up. That's in this case, we have a rental of $20 per square foot with the CAM charge estimated to be at $5 per square foot. Whatever the actual monthly charges are for the maintenance of the property, that month is what the tenant will pay. And if it's 2,000 square foot of space, you don't just take 20 plus 5, 25 times 2,000, because that doesn't tell you what the rent is. That's a combined thing of the rent and the CAM. You're better off separating them. You do 2,000 square feet times $20 per square foot. That's $40,000, but that's the annual divided by 12, and the tenant is responsible. The monthly rent is $3,333.33. That's how we calculate the rents on commercial and industrial properties. And then we'll separately calculate what the CAM charges are. $2,000 square feet times $5, that's $10,000 divided by 12. That's an additional $833.33 a month in CAM charges. Now you can get a picture of what your actual rent is and the expenses are on that property. Some properties have cheaper expenses, and you can see if the expenses are kind of more expensive than they should be or what have you, and determining if it's the place that you can afford for your business or not. So for this particular example, the rent would be $4,166.66.
But if you do combine it, the result will be the same.
It would be, but you'd have no clue how much your monthly rent is. CAM charges can vary month to month. So you should want to know what your clear picture is of how much your monthly rent is. And then a clear picture of how much those property expenses are. The landlord should try at least to save their tenants' expenses by shopping around for services to get a decent landscaper that's not going to be overcharging, for snow removal, for insurance, for, all of those other expenses. If those expenses are running kind of high, you may not want to rent from that particular landlord. And then you could add these two up and you could see what the overall expense will be. Yeah, you're right there. But I like to get a clear picture of everything so I could see what's going on, the breakdown. And I also want that landlord to provide me monthly a copy of their bills so I could do the calculations to make sure they're not overcharging me or charging me for something that they didn't pay.
And why we divide by 12? Sorry.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Why
Because
we divide 12?
that's the annual charge divided by 12 for 12 months.
So this is annual, look.
Yeah, these are monthly payments. Yep, these are annual. It's not $40,000 a month rent.
Yeah.
Not for 2,000 square feet at $20 a square foot. That's annual. All right, so here's the breakdown for a percentage lease. I'm just putting my notes to this. Common in large shopping centers, tenant would pay a small fixed rent plus a percentage of the gross income. Percentage of their gross income in total, or perhaps above a certain figure. Landlords could add a provision that the tenant must gross a certain minimum in sales as well. And rent may vary according to the nature of the business and the rental agreement. These, I guess, are custom. Now, there's other lease types. Under the category of other lease types on page 247, they're talking about provisions that are added to longer term leases that talk about rent escalations. So an example would be a variable lease where provisions are added to the long-term lease with a built-in predefined escalation of rent charges. You could just have them that, hey, the first year, this is the rent. The next year, the rent goes up to this amount or by this percentage or by this dollar amount, however they structure it. Or they could say, well, each year of this long-term lease, how much the rent goes up would be tied to a cost of living index. We call that a COSI index, as published in the New York Times Sunday edition paper on the first or second Sunday of that month of the new year. Okay, and whatever percentage it went up by or down by, usually up, that's how much the rent will go up by. So these are different ways that landlords could structure these commercial and industrial leases. Now, ground lease is a form of triple net lease. The tenant rents land. They're renting the raw land. There's no building on it. And then they erect their own building on the raw land. This should be a long-term lease, and it is not uncommon for leases to be 50 to 1,000 years. Country hasn't even been around that long, right? So 50 to 1,000 years are not uncommon leases. Hey, if you're going to be constructing a building on a property, you better get it a long enough lease that the juice is going to be worth the squeeze, that it's going to pay for itself, right? So here are some famous ground leases that you may have heard of. The Empire State Building. You know, the people that constructed that building don't even own the land that it's sitting on? That world iconic building, they don't even own the land. The land is owned by the Port Authority. MetLife Building, the Chrysler Building, the World Trade Centers, all that used to be on land that's owned by the Port Authority. Used to be. It's owned by the land that's owned by the Port Authority. Now World Trade Centers got knocked down, but now we got the Freedom Tower there in its place. Do not confuse a land contract, which is a type of seller financing, with a ground lease. Land contract is a type of seller financing. It's for like a rent to own. A ground lease is where you're leasing the ground and constructing a building on it. Then we also have mineral leases, oil and gas leases. These are mineral lease or oil and gas leases. Landlords rent the land to the tenant who tries to extract minerals from the ground. The landlord collects the rent plus a share of the profits. I just explained to you guys a little while ago, like that Alaskan Gold Rush show on TV. But it could be over oil, gas, gold, silver, any precious metal or mineral that's needed. So let's do the highlights for this. Next to variable leases, just write provisions added to long-term leases. Ground lease is also a triple net lease because the tenant's going to be renting the ground that they construct a building on. Taxes are going to go up on it, right? Now that you have a building on it, tenants can be responsible for paying those taxes. Tenants can be responsible for maintaining the building that they constructed. Tenants can be responsible for the snow removal or the paving of the parking lot, etc. So it's a triple net lease. And oil and gas leases are also known as mineral leases.
Got it.
All right. Look at that. The Empire State Building. Look at that building. It was the tallest building in the world for the longest time. It's an iconic building. Imagine constructing that building, then the massive cost to construct it and the time to construct it. And you don't even own the land that it sits on. You better get a long enough lease that'll pay for itself, right? To get that building full of renters to construct, to pay for itself and then be profitable. Well, this was constructed back during the Great Depression in the 20s. So it's an iconic architecture to it. The observation posts around the roof. What are the primary functions of a property manager? What would you think are the primary functions of a property manager? What are their duties?
To manage the property.
What do you mean by that? To manage the property?
They're in office to, they rent out the apartments or whatever it is.
All right, let's just say that it's a strip mall. You got hired as a property manager for a strip mall. What is your primary goal, your primary objective?
To get people in all of the spaces to pay for the property.
Anything else?
Rent and maintenance.
Collect rent and maintain the property? Come on, elaborate. Tell me, what does a property manager do? I don't know. I'm playing stupid here. I want you guys to educate me. Tell me, what does a property manager do? What would you think a property manager does? How do they manage a property? What is their primary objective, their primary goal? Just collect rents and fix stuff? All right. Let's go back to the slide here. The primary function of a property manager is to maintain or increase the value of the property while generating income as an agent for the owner. A lot of times I get people tell me, yeah, it's to get tenants and to fill vacancies, to evict tenants, to clean up the property, do the snow removal, do this, that, and the other thing, do the repairs. It's like, yeah, you're focusing on you're too close to it. You got to back up a little bit and look at the overall picture. What is that primary objective? To maintain or increase the value of the property for the owner while generating income for them. And of course, you maintain or increase the value by maintaining the property, but it could also be suggesting improvements and making improvements to the property, because if they do that, then maybe they could get even more income out of the property. Sure, securing suitable tenants, collecting rents, caring for the premises, budgeting and controlling expenses, hiring and supervising employees versus independent contractors that are going to be employees for the property owner. If they gave us the authority to hire employees that would be employees under that property owner. What would determine that? What determines what specific duties we're required to do? The property management agreement where they hired us to manage their property. It kind of works like our limited power of attorney that defines the scope of the authority they've entrusted to us on how we could legally bind them to contracts. Hiring employees. If we get tenants, do we sign the contracts or does the landlord sign the contract? It depends. What does it depend on? Depends on what it said in the property management agreement. Keeping proper accounts, making periodic reports back to the owner. So let's highlight and then write this in here. The property manager is someone who preserves or increases the value of an investment property while generating income as an agent for the owners. I was just looking something up here. It's called Festival Plaza now. It's been renamed. They had an anchor store in this plaza, this shopping center. It used to be named or known as the name of that store. That was the anchor store there. It's right. It's in Edison on Route 27, just before you get into Highland Park. Not sure if you guys are familiar with this. This shopping center was it was run down. It was practically empty. It had like three tenants. The one main anchor store, which I forget what it was called, there was an Indian bank and a Chinese buffet. Oh, and a massage parlor. And that's all that was there. And most of the stores were vacant in this shopping center, which had a huge parking lot. And the landlord couldn't rent out those units for the life of them. I thought they were asking too much money, for at least for what you got. It was an old shopping center. It looked like the front signage was made in the 50s. The windows were so scratched up and old you couldn't even see in the stores from a distance. So, you know, the roofs were leaking in some of the stores. So you could tell when they switched their property management. Because all of a sudden they started tearing off the roofs was the first project. And then they tore out all the glass and removed the glass and replaced the glass for the main units there. And then they changed the facade to a modern looking, boulder looking, they got the boulder look or the boulder rocks for the exterior of the building instead of the stucco. Then they tore up the whole parking lot and repaved the entire parking lot. They put in new signage, modern signage that matched the facade of the building with the boulder looks, the rock look. And then they put in plants and such to beautify the lot. And then pretty soon it got fully rented out. it was fully rented out at much higher rents now. And then something else started to happen. They started doing pad leases. They were doing ground leases of pads where somebody would come in and they would construct a building in the parking lot there and then have additional buildings that they would construct and then they would rent. So the tenant came in and constructed the building and paid the landlord a rent. They did a ground lease, basically, for a pad spot. And so you had that basic strip mall. It was just one strip mall way far back. Parking lot was all in the front. It was just that one strip mall in the back. And then off to the side, they did a construction of a separate building. And then next thing you know, on the other side, they constructed another building. And then they constructed another little mini strip mall over there. And now, if you look at it today, there are even more buildings there. They renamed it what did they rename it? Here it is, the Festival Plaza. All right, if you guys are familiar with this, this thing was run down looking not too long ago. Not too many years ago, it just had it was called the H Mart. That was always the anchor store there. The H Mart Plaza, because it was all known for its anchor store. Now the H Mart is still there, but in this look, that now they have some fancy looking name for the plaza now with signage for that. Then they replaced the signage. Okay, now you have, look at this, you have all these other stores in there, but this was always the one building that was there. Okay, it was just one building. Now they got another separate mall on the side where they got, look, it looks like the Great Clips, and they got a couple of other stores over here. All right. Around the corner, there's even more buildings where they got a medical group and dental group. That's all new modern building that they built. All right, so it looks like these are only like the few buildings that they have shown here. Let's go to their website. Where is their website? I think you could see it better. Or actually even better, let's look it up on Google. Festival Plaza. Festival Plaza in Edison. All right. And we could look it up on their website. I think on their website they have some stuff, but either way, Google has pictures of it on the outside. But let's look at their website first. So the H Mart, that was always the main anchor store. I have no idea what an H Mart is, but they got a lot of stores in there. Now look, they got fancy stuff there. Okay, so they got shopping, restaurants, banks, salons, spa, dessert, healthcare, cafes. Look at this. They've got all of these additional, this is all new construction, multi-level stores now. Previously, these were all one-level stores set back. There was only the one building. They've got buildings. They got multiple level buildings there. Let me see if I could show you all the shops and stuff. Oh, well, you could see it here. The plaza was pretty built up. Okay, look at it now from the aerial view here. You know, now off of Route 27, you pull in the parking lot. Oh, can I back up on that?
One of my close friends work in the Island Spa over there.
Yeah, I mean, well, look here. Look at it. They just wrote tenant, tenant, tenant. You know, this is, I guess, just architectural drawings. I don't think that is actually the way that it is there. Yeah. Now leasing. Okay. So basically, these are those original pictures or drawings. But let me try to look up on Google their images on the maps. There we go. Let's look it up on the maps. So you could see this. It's now called Festival Plaza. It was always known as the H Mart because that was the anchor store there. Even in Google's pictures here, you could see, so this is the entire property over here, right? Surrounded by homes. And then I think this is another little strip mall. Oh, or gas station right there. So they got they got two driveways now going into it. It used to just be one right here. So here it still shows as a grassy, unbuilt place, but this is actually a building now. They put up a building there. They got a big building here. This is a big building. This was always the original building right here. That was it. They built up this stuff. This is new. This is a new mall. This is where that medical part is. They've got restaurants here. There's some other thing here. It looks like big. When you drive by it at night, you get blinded by the lights. It's so bright with all the LED lights and such that they got there now. Let's see. Let's zoom in on it a bit. So this is now, they got several buildings over here now. Got the big parking lot. You've got these and all these additional stores. Let's see if we can get the street level view. Where did I get that? I previously got all that stuff from a previous class. We went over this and I was able to pull up street views and such. Oh, that's why. You take this little guy and you drop him right there. There we go. And now we could see, oh, nope, that's across the street. Look at all the stuff that they got there now. So this is where it was showing that there's no building. This is the new building that they just built there. You know, that previous Google thing was just showing grass. Well, this is a new building that they got there now. You got that newer signage that they put in. This was the only entrance at one point, and it was 2 lanes. Now they got 2 lanes in, 2 lanes out. It got a lot busier. You could go into there, take a look around, see what's there.
They have mostly Asian stores.
Yeah, they're mostly Asian stores, but they got all kinds of stuff, you know. Look,
Because I went for the Paris Bugatti.
what's that?
Went to one of the stores, Paris Bugatti.
Well, let me see. We have Island that's some sort of a spa. We've got we got that Asian bank there, Cathay Bank. We have some kind of a barbecue place there, Korean buffet, picnic garden, all you could eat. All right. Oh, this is the H Mart. I guess it's some sort of an Asian supermarket. What else we got? I have no idea what that is. We got a bunch of different places to eat. Yeah, a lot of them look like they're Asian places.
Yeah, most of them.
Mm-hmm. Here's another type of bank. Boom Boom Chicken. Paris Baguette. We got some more stores around here. No. Okay, that's just another entrance or exit. If we go in this direction, Happy Lamb Pot. Okay, a lot of eateries it seems like they got in here, huh? Spice 24, Sunbright Hair Salon, Kung Fu Tea. Fresh meats. Okay, we got an education place. We have some sort of a one-stop, some kind of medical care facility here. Delta Dental, or is that? No, it's some kind of United Dental Group. Around this side, there's another kind of medical group, and it looks like some kind of other stores over here. Get across the grass. Can we get across the grass? We skip? No. Either way, you guys get the idea. This place was previously only one building in the back, and now you've got all these buildings that wrap around, additional buildings that were built here, here, and here. You could tell when the property management changed, it all got modernized. It all got new. You had tenants constructing the buildings, not the landlord. The landlord's not spending the money on this. These are tenants that are constructing it and getting long-term ground leases. It's quite interesting how you saw with the change of a property manager can have an impact on the income to the property. All right, so that was the suggestion of the property manager to do improvements. The first things they did was they replaced the roof of that building in the back. Then they replaced the glass. Then they replaced the facade. Then they repaved the parking lot. Then they put in the shrubs and stuff. Then they redid the modern signage out front. And now you got all those additional buildings that have been constructed since. So property management agreement is a written agreement that creates the agency relationship between the owner and the property manager. It acts as the limited power of attorney, which defines the scope of their authority and how they can legally bind their clients to contracts. So while most real estate agents function as special agents, we're limited in what we can do. We cannot legally bind our clients to a contract. If you're a buyer's agent, you're hired to help guide a buyer through the process of purchasing, getting qualified for a loan, helping them find a house that meets their criteria. We can't write contracts and sign them and submit them on their behalf. We could prepare contracts and then they sign them and then we submit the offer. If they're a seller, they hire us to market their property to find a ready, willing, and able buyer. We can't do the negotiations or on our own without consulting with the owner or accepting offers on their behalf. We have to present those offers to the owner that come in within how long? 24 hours. Whereas a general agent, they may be given the legal authority to legally bind their clients to contracts by signing leases and doing things that legally bind their clients to a contract within the scope of their authority as was defined in the property management agreement that specified what their duties are and how they could legally bind their clients to a contract. So general agents are typically property managers. Special agents are everybody else. Most likely, you guys, if you're not going to be working as a property manager, you're going to be very special. You're a special agent, okay? You can't legally bind your clients to a contract. Only general agents can. And what gives them that authority? Their power of attorney. And what is their power of attorney? Their property management agreement. Okay, but they have all the same fiduciary duties as a special agent would. Cole, remember that? From way back, chapter 3, care, obedience, accounting, loyalty, and disclosure. So let's highlight on page 248, the property manager is usually considered a general agent, whereas most real estate brokers function as special agents. We also went over that back in chapter 3. All right. So property managers, they deal with budgeting expenses, the operating expenses, capital expenditures, renting the property, setting the rental rates, tenant selection, collecting the rents. They could be tasked with these things, but not necessarily. Depends what it said in the property management agreement. Maintaining and improving the property, hiring employees versus contracting for services. And maybe even things like getting an insurance specialist to come in and evaluate the type of insurance coverage that the property owner has to ensure they have the proper amounts of coverage. Do you have too much of this insurance and not enough of this insurance coverage? We need to get somebody to come in and analyze that, some sort of an expert in insurance. So if you guys are interested in becoming involved in property management, there's a designation class you could take. There's several of them out there. This is one that's provided by IREM, the Institute of Real Estate Management, in cooperation with BOMA, the Building Owner and Managers Association. It's called the CPM, the Certified Property Manager. If you're interested in community management for like condominiums and such, you could take this one, CHI, Community Association, or actually you could become a member of that. That's not a class. The Community Association Institute. It's a resource for those involved in managing condominium client complexes. Here's some additional resources I have down here. All of these links can also be found in that class links Word document about property management. So there's the CPM on page 251, Certified Property Manager, the CPM. This has been around for a long time. The Institute of Real Estate Management was founded in 1933. It's part of the National Association of Realtors now. And the members may earn the designation of Certified Property Manager. The Building Owner and Managers Association, BOMA International, is a federation of local associations of owners and managers, primarily of office buildings. Participation in groups like this allows property managers to gain valuable professional knowledge and to discuss their problems with each other and the issues that they face. And the growing field of managing cooperatives and condominiums, the manager may be hired by the homeowners organization to manage the condominium complex. So you could get information from CHI. The Community Association Institute is a nonprofit organization founded in 1974 to research and distribute information on association living and offers training and designation for specialized management of these kinds of complexes. If you're interested in maybe doing that, becoming a property manager for a condominium complex maybe, or several. All right, that concludes Chapter 12. Let's do the key terms to review for Chapter 12. There are 2 key terms to review for this chapter. Before we get started in them, let's go to key terms 2. And next to letter B, it says tenants remaining after the lease term without the landlord's consent. I want you to write at the end of that line, and not paying rent. And not paying rent. And then next to letter D, where it says lease with regular payments and no stated ending date, I want you to write at the end of that line, automatically renews. Automatically renews. Okay, so let's get started on those key terms to review now, shall we? Key terms 1, landlord's responsibility for providing decent conditions.
Implied warranty of
Habitability, correct. Implied warranty of habitability, 9 is A. A transfer of property by lease. A transfer of property by lease.
Demise.
Demise, correct. 4 is B. A situation when a tenant remains after the lease period has expired. What did those tenants do?
Is holdover tenancy?
Yep, they held over. So it's a holdover tenancy. 8 is C. A contract between the landlord and the tenant transferring the right to use real property for a specific period of time in exchange for rent.
Lease.
Yeah, it's a
Lease.
lease. 10 is D. A lease for a definite period of time. Has a definite period of time. You know when it begins, you know when it ends. Has a start date.
State for years.
And a
for
state
years.
for years. 5 is E. That is correct. Um, mm, 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 mm. So a suit for possession, legal removal of a tenant.
Eviction. Oh wait, is that actual eviction?
Actual
What?
eviction.
Actual
Television, yeah.
eviction. 1 is F. Rental of land on which a tenant erects their own building.
Ground lease.
7 is G, a ground lease. The tenant.
The tenant.
Leasing.
The
Leasing.
lessee. 11 is H, the lessee. Correct. A lease under which a landlord pays taxes, insurance, and other expenses.
Gross lease.
The gross lease. 6 is I. Transfer of primary responsibility for a lease to another party.
Assignment.
Assignment. 2 is J. And tenant is forced to move because the rental unit becomes uninhabitable.
Constructive eviction.
Constructive eviction.
3 is K, constructive eviction. Correct. All right. A lease in which a tenant pays expenses like property taxes, insurance, and so forth.
Net lease.
Net lease.
3 is a net lease. Tenant remains after the lease term without the landlord consent, and they're not paying rent.
Tenancy of sufferance.
9 is B, the tenancy at sufferance. Lease in which a landlord shares in the gross receipts of the tenant's business.
Percentage lease.
A percentage lease. 4 is C. A lease with regular payments and no stated ending date. It automatically renews.
A tenancy. No, a periodically estate.
A periodic estate. 5 is D. Person who looks after another's rental real estate.
Property manager.
Property manager.
Property manager. 6 is E. As in Edward. Tenancy that may be terminated when the landlord or tenant wishes.
A tenancy at will.
It is at their will. Correct. 10 is F. Landlord's court action to evict a tenant.
Suit for possession.
Possession.
Suit for
Yeah.
possession. 8 is G. A transfer of only a portion of a lease. It's a weird way to write it, but okay, let's go with that.
Sublease.
Sublease. 7 is H. Property manager's employment agreement.
Management agreement.
Yep, the management agreement. 2 is I. State requirement that tenants be notified of their rights.
Truth in renting.
Truth in renting.
11 is J. Correct. Landlord.
Lesser.
They are the lessor.
Lessor.
1 is K. All right. Oh, by the way, so that concludes chapter 12, I'm sorry. But remember that video, I uploaded it about those service animals. I uploaded that video and I got it to show to you. I'll show it to you really quick here. It's only a couple seconds long. It's a video about another type of service animal. I got it off of social media. Somebody uploaded it there, showing about these amazing animals. So let's take a look at this. So here's an example of the service animal at work. Check them out right here. This is pretty cool. I still want Yeah. Let's let's mute the volume on that. Then my phone starts ringing. Okay, so let's see. Let me rewind this so that you can see this here. Okay, you got the girl. She's working on her computer at home. The dog gets her attention because he notices something is up with her. Let's say the dog is telling her to sit down, basically. He'll get her medicine. Don't worry. He jumps up, grabs her medicine, brings it to her. Then he opens the refrigerator to go get her a bottle of water. And he sits there with her. Yeah. Was I not sharing that or something?
No, it's
Oh, okay. Yeah, but that's a pretty neat little video there. You saw it, it was quick and short. The dog sensed that a medical condition was coming on. He jumped on her, put her against the wall, was telling her to come down. She sat down. He went, got her medication, then got the bottle of water out of the fridge for her. That's pretty cool that you could train your dog to do something like that. These animals are amazing. The things that they could do, how they could sense and smell that your blood sugar, your level of sugar in your blood, whether you need to take insulin or grab a snack and then go get it for you. It's amazing that they could do things like that, but they can. So just wanted to share that with you. I thought it was pretty cool. All right, so that concluded chapter 12.